Okay, as we begin to get ready for the sewing part, I want to talk a little bit about invisible thread. Sometimes invisible thread can be a little bit intimidating. I like to tease and say the best and the worst thing about invisible thread is that it's invisible. But it gives a great look. My philosophy is you have to let the invisible thread know that you are the boss of it, and then it's going to be easy to use, and I think you'll really like it. The invisible thread comes on different size spools. It's a nice fine thread, so there's a lot of thread on a spool. So one thing I like to do is you can buy pre-wound bobbins of the invisible thread. Now we are not going to use it in the bobbin. We're going to use it as a top thread. But the bobbins are small, they're lightweight, because one of the issues that can come up with invisible thread is how it is being fed. So as we thread up our sewing machines, we want to have it be the easiest possible way that we are feeding that thread through. So I like using the pre-wound bobbins in the top because they're lightweight, they're easy to thread, but remember we are not going to put it in the bobbin, just in the top. So that's what I've got threaded up now, is that pre-wound bobbin. Now, another thing with the invisible thread is what your stitch is going to look like. So if we look at our project for today, we've got our raw edge applique, and then we have our turned applique. On turned applique, I always do a small zigzag. I like the look of that zigzag stitch because it kind of gives the look of a hand sewn applique. Now for the raw edge, I'm going to show you the option of either doing the same zigzag around the edge of the raw edge applique, or some people like the look of a straight stitch. So we'll do both of those today, and then you can kind of decide which you like the best. So before I start sewing on our project, I've got just a little sample here, and I want to show you what your stitch is supposed to look like, because the invisible thread is a really fine thread. And so sometimes, because it is such a fine thread on the top, we will need to loosen the top tension on our sewing machine. And sometimes we are afraid to touch our tension, but I want you to be brave. And we'll show you what the stitch is supposed to look like, and that'll give you the courage to loosen up that top tension if you run into a problem. And you don't always. So I've just got a little sample here. I'm going to bring this over to the sewing machine. I have my sewing machine set up at a center position zigzag, and then now even if we all had the same sewing machine and I told you the settings for your zigzag, they could even be just a little bit differently. So I like to say center position zigzag, the stitch width, you will have it at a 1.5, and the stitch length, you will set at a 2.0. Now, like I said, we could all set our machines up like that, and there will be completely different stitches. So what will happen is you will find the stitch that is perfect for you. So just start out slow, and you will see the stitch that you will like. So I've got this set at a center position zigzag. This is a raw edge applique that I'm sewing on. And so it's not quite as important, but I am going into the applique, then into the background. I'm going to go just a little bit farther, and let's pull this out. And I just want to show you what this stitch is supposed to look like. Let's get that thread out of the way. All right, so if you notice on the back, you've got a nice little zigzag. You want to see a nice little zigzag, and what we're talking about here is the tension. And then on the front, you should basically see nothing. You don't want to see any bobbin thread pulling up from your bobbin. So when your stitch looks like this, you know your tension is just right. If you do see bobbin thread kind of pulling up, then you will loosen that top tension. So if your top tension, let's say your top tension is at a 4, I would dial that down to a 3. So just one full number, and then just do a little retest and see how it looks. So that should help you as you're going forward. Okay, so now that we're going to start on our project, we're going to sew around our little guy's face here. and get all this sewn down, and then we'll sew all the way around him. And then I do want to show you how we're sewing along this vine, and we're going to sew the leaf at the same time. So let's get started. Bring this under. Now I like having all of this down because it's really nice to have the applique sewn through the background at the same time. All right, so I'm going to start out with a zigzag. Now, one thing I wanted to point out here is every sewing machine foot is different, but I do like to have a foot that shows, see how I have a little red mark right in the center? It's nice to have a foot on your sewing machine that will distinguish the center, because if you run the edge of your applique right along that center, it's going to really help you get both sides of the applique. So we're going to go around this guy, this circle, with a little zigzag. Now, it seems like I am going slow because I am. This is one of those techniques where the speed will come. I really like to encourage you to start out slow. So we're turning our whole little project around in here, but we've got plenty of room to do that. Let's get this flat. Let's move it around, get some of that out of our way, maybe. But the speed will come. And when you're learning any new technique, I really encourage you to just go a little bit slower at first. That'll really help to build your confidence. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going all the way around that eye. What's really important with the invisible thread is at the beginning and the end should be nice and secure. So as I'm going around that little eye, as I come around, I'm going over my beginning stitching just a little bit, just so that's nice and secure. So we're going to come down here to the end. Now, this is right at the bottom of the eye, of the white part of this eye. So I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to continue on. And I'm going to pick up my speed a little bit because I'm super daring. Let's kind of get that nice and flat. So you can see how I'm going in and out into that applique and then into the background. Now, one thing I want you to notice is the stitch length was a little bit tight, which was important as we were going around this little eye. Now we're going around a little bit bigger piece. And so instead of a 2.0 length, I'm going to increase it to a 2.5. Now, the width of your stitch will always be the same, but the length is going to change depending on the curve of the applique that you're sewing down. So as we come around our eye, now, the other thing with invisible thread, so I'm going back over my original stitching. Instead of pulling, now I'm finished with the eye, and instead of pulling all this out and clipping the threads, I'm just going to lift up my needle, and I'm just going to move over to my next spot, which is going to be the nose. Instead of pulling out and cutting that thread, it's a lot easier just to lift up and move over. And then after you have that sewing done, you can kind of go and clip those jump stitches. So now, just for fun, we are going to change to a straight stitch. We're going to do a straight stitch around this nose. Let's back up just a little bit. And I'm coming in on a straight stitch on this raw edge applique. I'm just 2 or 3 threads away from that edge of the applique. This is just a personal preference. One is not better than the other, but it does have a little bit different look. And so this is just, like I said, personal preference, whichever one that you feel like you like better. So we've gone all the way around. I'm going to do just a couple little extra stitches just for good measure. I'm going to lift this up, and now we're going to move down to the mouth. Now we used the same fabric for the mouth. Okay, I'm going to go back to my center position zigzag. I'm going to change that stitch width to 1.5. I like that width. And then I'm going to put this at a let's do that 2.5 stitch length because this is a little bit longer piece. Now, do you notice how our little, let's get him nice and flat here. So our little raw edge applique tooth is jutting in. So I'm going to zigzag right across there. And I'm going to go around that tooth. So notice also, if you have the feature on your sewing machine where you can stop with the needle in the down position, that sure does make it nice and easy for applique. Or you can just turn your hand wheel. So we're going all the way around. This is the easiest way to keep that stitch continuous, even though we're going to be going over this part of, let's get him turned around. Okay, even though we're going to be going over this part of the tooth again, it's still going to be much easier. All right, so we're going to go around this curve. So when we're going around curves, I'm going to stop and make sure I lift that presser foot, and again, not try to force that underneath the presser foot. So stop often, pivot. If I like this zigzag all the way around. So again, going across this tooth. It just sounds funny describing sewing over a face. Now we're sewing his eyes and his teeth. But that's one thing I love about jack-o'-lanterns. They just have so much fun personality. All right, so down this other side. Again, we're sewing across that same part again. Going inside that zigzag. So the sewing is actually your reward for all that nice prep work that you did, because this part, I think, goes really nice and fast and gives you such a nice completed project. Okay, so now we've gone back over that stitching. Now this might be a good time to just go ahead and cut the thread, because we're going to jump clear over to here. And we're going to come and go around the outside of this pumpkin. Now the pumpkin, it has quite a longer, I guess, bigger curves. So I'm going to bump that stitch length up to a 3. So we're going a little bit longer on that stitch length. Again, keeping my eye on that center red mark on my foot, and keeping that zigzag going in the applique and then in the background. That mark on the sewing foot really, really helps. All right, hang on, let's turn that. We can speed right up this edge. You can always tell how someone drives in their car by how fast they sew. Oh, golly. All right, coming around this corner, and again, I'm stopping often to pivot, so I make sure that all those curves get sewn down. Now this is another spot where, just to keep our stitches nice and continuous, I'm going to just pivot, and I'm going to sew around that stem. This is another reason why it's so nice to have all this applique fused down, because I am really manhandling our piece here, and so it's just really nice to have these nice and appliqued down. Okay, so I'm going to go back over that same stitching that we just did, and here we go down the right side. Now I have a little bit of mine lifting up, and if I was being really good, I might take this back over to the iron and press that down again. But I feel like this is laying really nice and flat, so I'm just going to keep on sewing. But that would be a good reason to take it back to the iron and maybe use that glue stick. Okay, so now I've gone all the way around this pumpkin. I'm going to pivot without lifting up my thread. I'm just going to pivot this, and I'm going to continue right on with our stem. I'm keeping this zigzag exactly the same. Now the stem, I'm going just a little bit slower because we do have a lot of curves. Let's get this nice and flat here. There we go. All right, coming around, stopping often. Keep that applique nice and flat. This is really nice. Instead of trying to watch that needle go up and down, I'm really trying to concentrate on that little red center mark on the foot and keep that along the edge of my applique as best I can. So now this is really fun. We're going to stop right here, and we're going to go ahead and applique our leaf down. Put that flat. Now, on the raw edge, like we said at the beginning, it's not quite as important to do your stitching in the applique and in the background. It's all right if most of your stitching is right on the applique. That's going to kind of help to secure that raw edge, and over time, if for any reason, because of weather, or if it was a project that was going to be used, this is going to really secure that raw edge so that you're not going to get much fraying out of that raw edge. Okay, coming around this curve of our leaf. We are so close. So I'm going to come down all the way to the point of that leaf, make sure it's nice and secure, and then continue on with our vine. Okay, so you're going to continue to sew your applique down on your whole project, and now I want to show you one more stitch.